Today I'm being joined by Kristin Damstetter. Let me introduce you really quickly before I bring her on. I'm so excited to have Kristin here. Kristin, who currently lives in Las Vegas, Nevada, is a mindfulness coach who guides women on their journey to living an authentic, joyful, and amazing life. Through her own personal struggles with anxiety in 2007, Kristin has self-educated herself through books and trainings in yoga, meditation, Ayurveda, and mindfulness. She now teaches others to reduce their stress and anxiety using mindfulness practices. So let me bring in Kristin. Hi, Kristin. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Nafisa. Thank you for having me. Such a pleasure.
I'm so excited to talk to you today. Your story sounds so fascinating. I just shared a little bit about who you are, but I would love to know more about what happened in 2007 and how did you get to where you are now?
Oh, wow. It was so long ago now. I feel like I was maybe 23, 24, and I was starting to have some health problems, and I had visited with my doctor. She had asked me a couple of questions, one of them being, do you exercise? And I'm, laughing, I go out dancing on the weekend and whatever. And she's like, you don't do yoga or anything? And I'm thinking, I'm living in LA at the time where everybody does yoga. And I'm like, yoga? No, like I'm not a granola munching hippie. And so, fast forward, maybe a few weeks later, she had suggested I start, looking into things that I'm interested in exercising. I remember picking up a dance class, and it was really challenging for me. I tried to run around the block to see if I could do that. I couldn't do that either. And soon after that, I found myself in school and having these heart palpitations, and I got really lightheaded, and I thought that I was going to faint, and my chest was really tight, and I didn't really understand what was going on. I thought that something was wrong with my heart. So I go back to the doctor, and they do all the tests, and she said, I think you had a panic attack. And I said, a panic attack? I don't have anxiety. There must be something else wrong with me. I was convinced that there was something else wrong with me. And I didn't really take it seriously, honestly, because, I thought that I had known myself pretty well, and I continued on with my life. I moved back to Buffalo, New York, and found myself in a similar situation not too long after. I was really having these ruminating thoughts. I was, racing thoughts, thinking about the same thing, and, starting to feel that anxiety again, except I didn't know that that was anxiety at the time. And I started looking into, how to meditate and control my thoughts, because that was really what I thought was bothering me, was these thoughts that I was having that were uncontrollable. And a girlfriend of mine had suggested that I go to a yoga class with her. She was really into yoga. And like I had mentioned earlier, that was not my thing. And she said, it'll be great. I'll show you everything beforehand. I'll pay for you. It'll be awesome. And I reluctantly said yes, because, I didn't have a good reason. She was paying, and okay, I had the time. So I went to a Bikram yoga class with her, actually, for the first time. First yoga class, hot yoga. It was super intense. I remember wanting to leave in the middle of the class. And at the end of the class, during relaxation, while I'm lying in Shavasana, I just remember feeling the best I had felt in, I don't know. It was definitely months, if not ever. And that was really what changed it for me.
So no matter what you did to try and escape yoga just kept following you around, huh?
Basically. Yeah. And that was really the beginning of my journey.
So I work with a lot of anxious patients, and I myself have a history of anxiety. And like you, I didn't know that I had anxiety all those years, even though I was in graduate school when I finally made the connection, but not because of any diagnoses manual that I read or any definition of anxiety. I just started looking back on my life and making connections because I wouldn't necessarily be fit the criteria of generalized anxiety disorder necessarily, because it wasn't necessarily causing impairments in my life. But like you, the same, getting stuck and just the ruminating thoughts, getting stuck on negative thoughts and irrational thoughts. But I knew for a fact that I had a relative, like my grandfather, had a history of OCD and anxiety. And so I knew that it ran in my family. What I ask my patients now is, a lot of them, they're like you. They're like, I don't have anxiety. What are you talking about? But when you ask, like, who else in your family struggles, they can always identify somebody. Did you look into that and make a connection with your family as far as the genetic component of anxiety?
I mean, I have family members that have, there's been some mental health issues in my family, but it was always it was severe. So there have been people like my great grandmother, I believe, had dementia, and my father had schizophrenia. So that was always, in the back of my mind. But I think those are really significant diseases or mental health problems that might stand out more than anxiety. And I know that my mom has anxiety, but she would tell you that she doesn't. So it wasn't something very prevalent in my family. In fact, I think I'm the only one in my family that has really started to uncover some of the underlying issues that have been going on for a while.
Well, despite the fact that it runs pretty deep in my family, I would be the only one that would actually acknowledge the fact that I have anxiety. So a lot of people that come from families that struggle with anxiety, a lot of people aren't going to be diagnosed. They're not going to have that definitive diagnosis that yes, anxiety runs in your family. But like you, I mean, you took it head on and you decided to do something about it. And that's what I really appreciated about your story, that you didn't just give into it and say, well, there's nothing I can do. You started educating yourself and training yourself and trying different things. And it wasn't just yoga, right? Can you tell us a little bit about that journey of healing that you went through?
Well, what I discovered, was that I felt better after yoga. And so I started doing yoga more regularly. But that was really the beginning of my healthy journey. So not only did I start practicing yoga regularly, I started exercising regularly. I was changing my diet, and I started to see how all these little things had an impact. And as I continued to do this, I didn't think that I was doing this because I had anxiety. I thought that I was just doing it to be healthier. And when I started becoming healthier and becoming more self aware through my yoga practices, through my meditation practice, that was when I really started to discover how my anxiety had lessened. And when I made that connection through my mindfulness practices, I was actually teaching in public education, and I started to see how stressed out and anxious my coworkers were. And I recognized how, I was able to handle some of the things that we were dealt teaching in public education, with large classroom sizes, the demands and everything that goes along with teaching. I noticed that there was a difference between how my coworkers were faring and how I was handling it. And I came up with this, not a solution, but had a realization that because of my mindfulness practices, my meditation practices, my breathwork practices were really the key component or the factor in how I was able to manage my stress. When I became more stressed or started to notice, because I was more self-aware through those practices, I started to notice the physical sensations attached to my thoughts, because I have learned that emotions themselves are neutral, but it's, the thoughts that are attached to those emotions that make them either good or bad. I can be anxious because I'm excited or nervous. I can be anxious because I'm fearful about what's going to happen in the future. So, but the emotion themselves aren't necessarily good or bad. It's what's attached or associated with those thoughts that start to then trigger the physical response. And so when I was able to recognize all of that, it made handling my daily stress and my anxiety much easier, and able to just recognize it sooner. So that was really, really powerful for me. And that was when I started to want to help other people with this, because it is something that I think most people struggle with, don't want to talk about, but is manageable.
Yeah, considering that it's the number one disorder in the world, there's so much shame and stigma around it. And a lot of people, because of the shame and stigma, would rather just take a pill and just suffer silently and not deal with it. But I always say, if a pill truly could take care of it, I wouldn't exist. Nobody would come to therapy to talk to me about it. You wouldn't be there, helping people, because it is more complicated than that. Anxiety affects every area of our life. And like you said, we have these thoughts, and then we have a lot of emotional charge attached to it. Our interpretation can make a thought either good or bad, or make us more anxious or excited. So there's a whole thing that goes with it. And for me, I feel like a holistic approach is the best approach. Like you said, like you weren't even aiming to control your anxiety, but you started exercising more, maybe even eating a couple of granola bars, or eating a healthier diet, and noticing that that makes a difference, right?
Absolutely. I can tell when I'm starting to get caught up in my head. And what I've learned that works for me is, when I'm in my head, it's time for me to get back into my body. And that's when I go out for a walk, or for a hike, or go to yoga, or go to the gym, because endorphins are real. And the physical body and the mind are inextricably connected. And I think that a lot of, Western science and medicine treats them separately. And, with Eastern practices, we take into the holistic approach. So, your thoughts and your mind are connected to your physical body. They're connected to your emotional body and your energetic body. And all of those things, when they're in balance, you find harmony. And that's really important to consider. We can't just take a pill that's going to, affect your mind, but it also affects your physical body, because there's side effects, and it's also temporary. So why not take in everything and start to just live life balanced and from like a holistic place? That's really, really powerful.
Yeah, I see taking a pill, like seeing that you have an infection in your arm, and you just put a Band-Aid on it, instead of looking to see, why is this keep getting reinfected? Why is this not healing? Really looking at your life like you did, like, okay, what's going on? Why am I having these thoughts? What can I do? Or even trying different things and then seeing the benefit of it. What you mentioned about yoga, or just even being in your physical body, because we tend to be in our head a lot when we have an over anxious brain, but anxiety shows itself in a physical form. And so a lot of trauma also gets stuck in our body as a physical reaction. And so doing something physical is the best thing we can do. There's that Taylor Swift song, Shake It Off. I always tell my patients that's the best song when you're really stressed and anxious. Just start shaking. I also love Qigong, which is a moving meditation like yoga. And they do have the Qigong shake, where you're shaking from head to toe. And it's a great way to discharge the feeling of anxiety that's in your body. But the physical is also a wonderful strategy, but it doesn't go to the root of the issue? Did you ever get to that as in your journey of healing? Because it's one thing to go for a hike and do these other things, but if you don't really understand what's causing the anxiety, you're not going to be able to have long-term control of it. What was your experience like on that journey?
I think for me, it was really understanding, why I was having those physical sensations and the correlations related to it. What was I thinking about at the time? What was going on in my life at the time? When I get triggered, starting to understand where that trigger had come from and working with a therapist to really uncover some of those things. So what I started to realize through talking to my therapist and just my mindfulness practices 100% have helped me again to become more self-aware, because awareness is key. When we become more aware, or when I became more aware, I was able to understand why I do the things that I do, why I'm reacting the way that I'm reacting. And I found that more times than not, I was not reacting to or responding to what was happening in the present moment, but instead of something that had occurred years ago, right? And was in the present moment triggered to respond in the same way because that trauma or whatever hadn't been resolved. And that was the way that I was, I created, a defense mechanism or a coping mechanism. And then that's when I had been able to link those moments to really understand what was happening. And then now getting the opportunity with mindfulness to not just react in the same habitual way, but instead to choose a new response. So being able to recognize when I'm being triggered because of something that happened years ago, and then pausing, and instead of reacting, choosing, how I would like things to go moving forward instead of living these patterns over and over again. And I believe that everyone can learn this skill to really take their power back and not be controlled by their thoughts or the emotions, especially from something that happened years ago.
Excellent points. And that's a thing. Another anxiety is future focused, where we might be triggered by something in the past, but we're freaking out about how it's going to affect us in the future, right? So when we're constantly focusing on the future, we're not in the moment. And one of the best ways to get ourselves back in our bodies is through mindfulness exercises or breathing exercises to get ourselves back and feel grounded again. Can you share some tips and strategies that you've tried that you found beneficial in the moment when you're feeling like you want to jump to the future and freak out about something you have no control over, or worrying about things that happened in the past? How can we bring ourselves back in our bodies?
Well, one of the things that I tell everybody first is to notice that our mind naturally wants to oscillate. It oscillates from the past to the present and to the future. We can worry about the future, we can worry about the past, and we're always just using our imagination when we worry about the future, right? Because it hasn't happened yet. We don't know for certain that that's going to happen. But we can use our imagination too to imagine a more positive outcome as opposed to a negative. And I think that that's a really cool way to look at it, because if I want to imagine something bad's going to happen, I start to get that anxious feeling, right? I start to feel, tightness in my throat or my chest. But that was created by my thoughts. So if I can create a positive scenario in my mind to think about the future, then I'm not having that tightness in my throat. And that's just one little, reframing your thoughts, but to be more present as opposed to not even just focusing about the future or the past. One of the ways that I like to focus on the present moment is to really get, again, grounded in my body and start to focus on my surroundings, starting to listen to the sounds. So if I'm outside, listening to the birds or, the leaves in the tree, or if I'm talking with somebody, listening to the words that they're saying, because oftentimes people aren't even listening. So active listening is a skill that can be acquired. And then start to feel the physical body. What's going on in my physical body? Am I sitting in a chair? Can I feel the chair beneath me? Can I feel the ground beneath my feet? What am I smelling right now? If I'm out to dinner with people and I'm getting caught up in my head, start to focus on, tangible things around you and connecting with the senses. So physical touch, scent, sight, visuals, sounds, auditory sensations. And the more you can get connected and grounded in tangible, physical, and sensory things, the more likely you'll be grounded in the moment. And then also breathing exercises for sure. One of my favorite is alternate nostril breathing. That is a lot better, in my opinion, for grounding anxiety because it is also physical. So you're switching your nostril and breathing one at a time. It slows the breath down. It activates the parasympathetic nervous system, and it gives your mind something to focus on also while your physical body is moving, which is way more grounding than just sitting and focusing on the breath without doing anything. That could actually increase mental agitation.
Yeah, I like the alternate nostril breathing. For some people, like, and for me, occasionally, one nostril always seems to be clogged. How do you get around that?
Well, I tell people at least, in the beginning to clear the nasal passages. And if you can't do that, one of the things that was taught to me was to imagine that you can feel the breath go up that nostril and then down. And still, doing that practice because, if you're familiar with Ayurveda, a lot of it is balancing the energies.
Mm-hmm.
And anxiety is associated with Vata, and Vata gets agitated in the mind. And the best way to ground Vata is through alternate nostril breathing. We can do that physically, and you can also travel with your mind without using your hand. That's another practice as well.
So just create a visualization, basically.
Mm-hmm.
What I love about visualization, and again, I'm the type of person that can't just sit and clear my mind when I'm meditating. This is why I love guided meditation and just relaxing, laying there and letting somebody else tell you to breathe and relax or visualize can be really easy for people with over anxious minds.
Yes. And body scan meditations, I think, are really great for that too, especially if you have trouble getting to bed, falling asleep.
Right.
Because again, it's not really where you're focusing on what's going on, the subtleness of what's in your mind, but the tangible sensations in the physical body.
Definitely. Can you say a little bit more about Ayurveda? Am I saying that right? Ayurveda?
Ayurveda.
Ayurveda. I could never say it right. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? I've always been fascinated by that practice. I'm a fan of Eastern philosophies and Chinese medicine, but I'm not too familiar with Ayurveda.
So Ayurveda is the sister science to yoga, and it means or translates from Sanskrit to life science. And it's the idea that everything in the universe is made up of these energies: earth, air, fire, wind, and space. And everybody has their own unique constitution that is made up of some combination of those elements. So some people naturally have more space and wind. Some people have more fire. Some people are more earthy. And depending on your physical characteristics and your parents, that determines, your prakriti, that's your constitution. And you may be more predominant, let's say, in fire. So I am considered a kapha, a pitta kapha, and that's fire and earth. And those elements, let's say, are my natural, constitution. But that doesn't mean that I don't still have, vata or some wind and space. We have all these different elements that make up, depend, and get affected by what's going on in our physical body, what we're digesting and information through all of our sensory organs, what we're eating, and those can become imbalanced. And in order to maintain balance, there are different, meditations to do. There are different breathing exercises and different things to eat, different yoga practices. So it's really taking in everything into account, your own personal, constitution. If something's out of balance, maintaining that balance and creating harmony within the system, so that it's to prevent disease and dysfunction in the body and the mind.
That's what I love about the holistic approach. It takes all of it into consideration. It's not, doesn't fragment us into body parts. It just tries to create a balance in the body. What are your own personal go-to strategies, whether it's mindfulness, yoga, meditation? What are your typical strategies for helping yourself feel balanced and calm?
Well, the number one thing that really helps me is routine. So I think for people who definitely are dealing with anxiety or feeling unbalanced, routine it can be magical. So waking up in the morning and doing my self-care practices, in Ayurveda we call it dinacharya, and that includes like cleansing the sensory organs, drinking warm water to clear the digestive tract, meditating, practicing gratitude, being out in nature, exercising regularly. Like the routine is really important. And then really connecting with the food that I'm eating and how that's impacting my physical body. That doesn't mean that, there aren't days where I eat chocolate or have a glass of wine, but I really pay attention to how everything is impacting my being. And the more connected we can become of our physical body, the more you'll start to discover that it's always communicating to us. And then I think once I became more aware of that, I was able to make better choices for myself and maintain balance longer. So I would definitely recommend, encouraging people to really just get in tune, create a routine that helps you to maintain that balance and stick with it.
Those all sound really good, like good suggestions and good ideas for people to get started with, because a lot of people, they don't know what to do sometimes when they're overwhelmed, and maybe they don't have access to mental health professionals. Maybe they don't have access to all the information, and just starting with a gratitude practice, just focusing on the little things, 3 different things every day that you're grateful for, right? Or even looking at your food and smelling it and putting it in your mouth and really tasting it can make a big difference. Any other suggestions you can share with us that we can get started on as far as getting us started on our healing journey, especially for the new year?
I think one thing that I learned that is really powerful, that may sound silly, is starting your day by saying to yourself, today is going to be a great day, because we have these biases naturally in our minds, the negativity bias and the confirmation bias. So if I start my day, or if you start your day saying today is going to be a great day, your mind will naturally start to look for all the ways that the day is going to be great, to confirm that you were right. So if you can start the day just saying that, or thank you for this life, thank you for, another day to live, and really feeling that gratitude in your body and expressing it daily, it really does begin to shift your perspective and the outlook for the day ahead. and for the week, for the month, and the year.
Great exercise to try in the mornings. So this was a really good conversation. I think we need to have as many tools for our tool belt, and yoga, meditation, mindfulness are definitely a part of my tool belt. And I encourage people to start collecting little tricks and strategies and rely on them when they're feeling overwhelmed, when they're feeling stressed, and when they're feeling anxious. So thank you for sharing all that. Where can people find you and connect with you? Are you on social media? Do you have a website?
I do. My website is kristindamstetter.com. I am also on Facebook and Instagram. I would say I'm more regular on Instagram than anything. So I offer guided meditations on Insight Timer as well. If you have that app, it's free. So feel free to join me, and thank you for having me. I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you. This was a wonderful discussion, and I think we need to continue to have this kind of discussion.
I
So thank
agree.
you for the very, very useful practical information.
Awesome. Thank you, Nafisa.